go through these stories in a bit more detail. Noah Khogali, the political commentator and Conservative councillor, is here. Noah, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. How are you?
I'm very well. I wonder what you think about this row over maternity pay that's the front page of the Telegraph, the Times today, as Kemi Badenoch she got it wrong yesterday.
I think ultimately this is the concern that a lot of people have about Kemi Badenoch in her running for potentially becoming the next Tory leader, is that she does seem to do this thing where she picks fights with people, realises that she shouldn't have, and then tries to backtrack, which is essentially what you've seen play out over the past day or so. I think most Conservatives at this point are quite open about the fact that we have a birth rate issue in this country, some of whom think we've been covering up that fact with high immigration numbers. But, others just acknowledging that it's something that most of the Western world is facing, and we're definitely facing in this country. The solution to that is not to start then trying to cut maternity pay. Well, quite obviously, that will make that issue worse. Kemi Badenoch called maternity pay essentially a quote-unquote function of taxation. That is exactly what it is. This is one of those scenarios where essentially the tax system exists to take from some sections in society to make sure that there is a broader societal good there. We need to make sure we get birth rates up. We should be looking at more policies to encourage motherhood, not trying to disincentivize it.
Yeah, she said families need to take more personal responsibility over their finances when they have children. She has tried to sort of clarify those points after, as I mentioned earlier. The Telegraph's perspective this morning, they say a source from a rival camp described it as an Andrea Leadsom moment, which, to jog your memory, that was when Andrea Leadsom was sort of derailed to try and lead the Conservatives back in 2016 because she said she'd make a better Prime Minister than Theresa May because she was a mother. I mean, that really sort of killed her campaign straight away. Is this the same, Noah?
I'm not sure whether it's the same because, look, ultimately, Kemi has tried to row back quite quickly. The reality is that I think she's realised that either this was the wrong thing to say or she did misspeak and got caught up in the moment. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of other headlines over the conference. So she's quite lucky that this has happened at the beginning of conference and she can say something else to grab some headlines. But it does mean that she needs to say something bold now over the next 24 hours or so that isn't going to be treated negatively.
Yeah.
So there is quite a lot of pressure on her to now prove herself and her political nous. Whereas the rest of them probably have a little bit more leeway. She looks like the one at risk now. It's not definitely done for her, but she is certainly under a lot of pressure.
The Conservative Party conference has got an awful lot of this sort of ridiculous merchandise. You can get Tom Tugendhat tattoos, I think fake tan as well. There was always sort of headline-grabbing things, but they can't deflect from some of the really serious issues. And Grant Shapps is running this sort of autopsy, I guess, of how the Conservative Party's entire vote-winning machine collapsed. It's going to be published today in Grant Shapps. It's going to be on Times Radio Breakfast. But in this report, they say the Tories are in the uncomfortable position of learning from the efficiency of the Liberal Democrats' campaign machine. I mean, it's important amongst all the silliness at a conference that they do grapple now with some of these really serious issues.
Yes, absolutely. Part of it is that campaign machine, and obviously he was referencing the strategy that apparently the Lib Dems undertook, although they denied, where they essentially just targeted any constituency with a Gales cafe in it, and identified that as somewhere where there was going to be realistically young people who were fairly financially comfortable or came from a family that were fairly financially comfortable, and that's what they targeted. The Lib Dems keep saying that's not what they did, but it seems to be either a very prevalent urban myth now or was actually their strategy. The point remains, however, that the Conservatives need to be better at targeting new groups, not just essentially going after older people again and again. It's a long been a frustration of mine that you speak to any young person, and look, I'm on the younger side, lots of my friends are not centre-right leaning, but every single one of them will complain the second they get their payslip about the amount of tax they are paying. There is such a potential breeding ground there for future Conservative voters, and we are missing them because we're not fulfilling those aspirational ideals which the Conservative Party should be. And that's something I think this report is really going to hone in on, is that the Conservatives have been focusing for too long on only making older people comfortable and not that ambition that young people all inherently have and is a fundamentally Conservative ideal.
There's another piece in the Times in the politics section today saying reform is picking up younger voters faster than the Conservatives. So that's what some Tory MPs have been saying, which sort of lends itself to what you've just been commenting on, Noah. Lots of politics for us to sort of get into. But let's move away to some other stories inside the papers this morning. And drink driving is the subject of the next story, where hundreds of people, I'm looking inside the Times, have been caught drink driving at least 4 times. So there is an idea to say for someone who's been caught drink driving, more than once, they should be forced to have a breathalyzer-style device in their car. That would mean you couldn't start the vehicle until you'd had a positive breathalyzer test. I mean, do we need systems like this in place?
I mean, it seems that almost 400 people have been caught drink driving at least 4 times in the past 11 years, including 4 people who have been prosecuted 7 times. That suggests to me that, look, we can look at rules to control how they start their cars, but to be honest, they probably just shouldn't be allowed to drive at all. There is no way that you should be going through the justice system that many times and still not learning your lesson. And we expect that, you couldn't manage it on the 7th time, but on the 8th time, you'll now have learnt your lessons. These people are going to be doing it again and again. And the thing we need to be looking at first is longer bans and more strict sentencing, and making sure that these people understand early that this is not only a risk to their own life and whoever's in the car with them, but also everybody around them. Yeah. So I've not got a problem with these alco locks and stopping these people from being able to start their car if they're not sober. But we also need to be looking at whether the length of bans and the repercussions for their actions are actually strong enough in the first place.
Yeah, I think you're right. I really do. Trying to work out why this happens in the first place. There's a story about education inside the paper as well. 70% of school leavers should go into higher education. That's according to a blueprint for university reform published today. There has been a bit of a change in narrative, hasn't there, Noah, the last few years, to say, in terms of what you do after school, maybe that doesn't have to be going to university. Maybe it should be an apprenticeship, maybe going straight into the workforce. Do we want 70% of school leavers to go into higher education?
70% is hugely high, and these are actually proposals from the group that represents vice chancellors. So there is an underlying current of concern about university funding in there, which I think might be swaying the proposals somewhat. So they're more potentially about making sure that universities have enough money. We're currently at 48.6%, and ultimately I think it depends what education people are doing. And I've long held a belief that we should be trying to integrate the apprenticeship system and the skills system more into the university system, so those people have the same experience. Because I think you've got a lot of young people now who, when they finish school, university is not merely just an opportunity for education, but it's a few years where they can spend time, number one, with friends, challenge themselves in a new environment. And a lot of it is social education as well as academic. And if you want people to be taking up those skills opportunities and apprenticeships, you need to be better at integrating them into the university system. So if that's putting them in halls, that could be something I think that encourages a lot of people. And that's how we break down the barriers for young people who may think, oh, all of my friends are going to university, I want the same experience, but don't necessarily need that academic certificate at the end of it. That might be more impactful, I think, than just setting an arbitrary 70% target for young people to all to go and get a degree.
Yeah, okay. Well, interesting to hear your analysis. Final thing I want to ask you about, Noah, is your smartphone cracked?
It has never been cracked.
Oh,
wow! I always thought this is slightly weird. Everyone else walking around with cracked smartphones is something I've always managed to avoid, which definitely means that in a couple of hours when I'm going to work, I'm going to drop it and break the first time.
I've broken every phone I've owned. They've all had cracked screens. This one, I think, has been about 4 months in the running. Isn't cracked yet, but it'll be inevitable. 1 in 10 Britons, though, apparently, and this is obviously a very silly piece of research, but here we go, are harming their professional and romantic prospects by using smartphones with broken screens. What did the survey say, Noah?
Essentially, that if you have a broken screen, people will judge you, which is slightly ironic because the same survey also suggests that lots of people break their own screens. I do think it's quite amusing that loads of us have these hugely, carefully crafted devices in our pocket, hours and hours of which goes into the design, and then most of us just slap a rubber case on it immediately and never get to reap the benefits of that design. Incredibly interesting one, and will have me thinking when I see people with cracked phones now whether I am underlyingly judging them.
Well, apparently 1 in 8 of us say we would avoid a second date with someone if they had a smashed phone. A similar proportion said they wouldn't hire them. What is it saying about you if you... Oh, Andrew, through the glass, who presses all the buttons, keeps on there, is nodding his head. No second date with Andrew if you've got a smashed phone. 1 in 33 incidents recording by phones being dropped in the lavatory. 1 in 100, I don't actually believe this, 1 in 100 were blamed on attacks by seagulls. Presumably the seagull attacked you and then you dropped your phone. Ridiculous. Anyway, if you've got a smashed phone screen, maybe today would be the day to go and fix it. Noah, thank you very much. Noah Khogali, the political commentator and Conservative councillor, going through the papers with me.